Welcome everyone in this new video tutorial about the multiplayer combat editor. In this video we're going to talk about the skill damage system, and it's going to be directly related to the damage, armor and armor system related to the combat manager. So if you haven't watched that video already, I think you should watch it before going through that video. So what is the skill damage system? It's simply how skill calculate their damage, and there is a built-in way for a skill to calculate their damage in the skill blueprint, and you can customize this. So we can check how in this video we're going to learn how you can customize this and what kind of things you can do with that. And if you haven't followed the video about the skill behavior, I suggest you to follow it, because we're going to customize that logic in our my active skill behavior. So we have two little warnings there. I'm going to fix them. If you hit compile, they are going to get to compiling is going to get rid of the warnings, but I think the two warnings we had come from a problem of MCE, and I'm going to fix that. So this is basically your skill behavior, and in there you want to modify how damage are being calculated. So in order to do that, you want to override. You want to drag and drop the little drop down menu to enable typing, and you want to type in get damage. You want to click that, and in there you can double click parent get damage, and it's going to bring up the skill logic that gets the damage. And right now you can see it's only what it is doing, it's just reading the damage stat of the skill and returning the current damage the skill does. And this is fine. Maybe you just want that, and in that case you can just let the arrange not be. But in other case, you might want to, for instance, modify the damage based on I don't know, an attribute the user has, for instance, how much strength or intelligence it has. And for that, you could just be, and also you could be wanting to modify the skill logic in order to get rid of the damage stat of the skill. So why would you want to get rid of that stat? Because each time you add a stat to something, it's becoming more expensive for the network to handle everything. And if you happen to have too much, if you happen to have a game where the bandwidth seems to be struggling, you might want to reduce the amount of stats your objects have. And why would you want a stat rather than a simple float? For instance, you could just have a float named damage, for instance, and just store the amount of damage the skill is supposed to do in that variable. But in that case, you won't be able to modify that variable at runtime using built-in MCE features and using stat modifiers. But maybe it's fine because you don't want to dynamically modify the amount of damage the skill does. Maybe the skill does a flat amount of damage, and after that it's using other stats like attributes, like I was saying. Maybe the skill deals 10 damage multiplied by the strength of its user, and in that case, and it never changes, and in that case you don't need a damage stat for your skills. So maybe you want to get rid of that stat and modify how damage are being calculated by adding your variable and adding a calculation afterwards. But in our case, we are just going to modify the logic for the skill to take into account a new stat, which is going to be an attribute. So we are first going to create a new attribute by going into the settings folder of MCE, going into the estat enum, add a new entry in that enum and call that strength, for instance. We're going to save. We're going to refresh all nodes in the BP skills, and it might take a while. because it will be compiling a lot of things. And now you can save everything by hitting Control-Shift-S, and you can go back to My Active Skills. And in there, you want to say that we want to say that the skill deals the amount of damage we want in depending on the stats, multiplied by we're going to say something like multiply by 1 plus 0.1 times quick get stats, character, strength, current value, and we want to plug the tags of the skills there. So this says that the skills deals the amount of damage we want depending on the stats, multiplied by increased by 10% by strengths you have. So it basically scales up the skill based on the strengths of the character. So if I'm hitting play, it's going to take a while because we added the stats and it's compiling a lot of stuff. So if we are hitting the other character, we're dealing 15 damage to him, and we are going to reduce the amount of damage we are dealing to him. Actually not, we are not going to do that. We are going to increase the amount of health our character has by going into the stat initialization and saying we have 100 health, hitting play once again, and dealing damage to the other character. It's fine, we are dealing him 15 damage. But now let's say we have a strength stat. Let's say we have that, and we actually have 0 strength. We are just going to deal 15 like we were. But if we have 10 strengths, for instance, we are going to deal why are we doing yep, 10 strengths mean 100 increased damage. So we said that skill was we said that all of our skills are scaling on strengths because we coded that in My Active Skill. And maybe you don't want your magical skills to scale on the strengths of your character. And in that case, you could just be promoting that to a variable and call that how could we scaling stats, maybe even damage scaling stats, and you could be promoting as well the 0.1 damage scaling factor like this. You could be compiling, going back to your skill folder, open up the BP slice, and in the class defaults on the right you have new. So go back to BP skill, and we created a function there, a variable there. We should never be doing this, creating new stuff in MCE core features. It was quite an error. Now go back to BP slice, and on the right we have 2 new variables, which are damage scaling stat and damage scaling factor, and they have these values by default. By default, skills are scaling on the stat else and by 0% by else. So we are going to modify this default value. Alright, that's quite strange. Alright, so if you followed the skill behavior video, you can understand what's going on there. So My Active Skill is the main parent class we created, and damage scaling stats is equal to strength, and damage scaling factor is equal to 0.1. And then we created a child class of this, which is my montage skill. And if we look on the right, my montage skill has these values modified, damage scaling stat and damage scaling factor, and we want to reset that by hitting the yellow arrow. like this. And if we go back to BP slice is now scaling on strength by 10%. And maybe we can change that scaling. 5% increase damage per strength, for instance. So we are dealing 23 damage. And I'm just going to tell my third-person character that it has the healing skill we created in the previous video, which is Furious Blow. And I'm going to make Furious Blow scale. Alright, so I wanted to make Furious Blow scale on intelligence, for instance. That's the logic I shown only works for damage. You have to do your own. You don't have a get heal mount function. You have to build your own logic when healing characters, and maybe you can build this logic in my active skill. So, but you could be scaling. Now you can be scaling your skills on any stat you want. So that was an example of how you can use the get damage function to modify how your skills calculate their damage. So this is it for that video. Hope you enjoyed it and hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.